Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by once again. Let me get straight to the Canal news. I keep thinking things are quieting down now, we can move on to other stuff. As you probably know, or if you've been following it at all, the BlackRock offer, the Americans offer to purchase the Chinese or Hong Kong ports. They're contracts. They're just contracts. They don't own the ports, just have contracts to operate them. And everything was peachy keen, and people were happy because it neatly took care of everything, only to have the Chinese decide to intervene and say, no, you're not going to do that. And they have put terrific pressure on the billionaire at the other end, who is in Hong Kong. And it appears that that is not going to come about. I don't know. You never know. You never know from one day to the next. These people just run around causing each other trouble, and they cause everybody else trouble in the process. It gets a little tiresome after a while. Anyhow, that one's wherever it is, and it will go on to whatever the next step is, and so on and so on and so on. We're not focusing. We're still not focusing on that until such time as we have to focus on that. What I have mentioned in recent weeks is the Social Security situation. We had that finished and over with. We've had one unpleasant demonstration where some union people in one particular area, not a very big one, caused serious trouble by throwing stones and rocks and whatever. People could have gotten hurt. I have seen greater violence in 15 minutes in a demonstration in Paris than I've seen here. But that's all right. It's not what happens here normally, so it always comes as a great shock. The legislation, that was before the legislation passed. The legislation has passed, and it is now law. It's not all the president wanted, but it's, on the other hand, more than he might have gotten under other circumstances. And I think they did a pretty decent job. And they've gotten pretty good grades for having gotten to that point. By people who set interest rates and things of this sort. There's respect for President Molino, because he seems to do what he says he's going to do, and he gets through, and he's very straightforward and blunt, and he stands there and takes reporters' questions once a week without fail, and this sort of thing, which is not typically the case here. It's an interesting thing to see unfold, but in any event, that is now back there, so to speak, behind us for the moment at least. The mine, now we can begin to think about the mine coming down. We're moving slowly in that direction. It is going to happen. I think most people expect it will be probably a little while before it gets here, maybe April before it's underway, the discussions at that point, but we're not pressing it, and neither are they. There was I have to admit, a little bit of amusement here at one stage when the head of First Quantum, the miner, came out and asked President Trump for help in getting the contract set up again. And he's a Canadian, it's a Canadian firm. He can't make these things up. So anyhow, that is not an issue here. At least it hasn't been one. I don't expect it will be. So that is going to come down the road here in a while, and we'll see what happens with that. We want it to work financially, but we also want everything else to work, and so there's going to be a lot of negotiation going on. But I know that we all know that the money is there, but we want it done in the right way, and now that's what they have to settle ahead of them. They've had plenty of time to think about it, and they do check in with each other behind the scenes, I'm sure, more than once in a while. Otherwise, from the real estate end here, things are pretty much what they have been. So a lot of great buys in the mid-level. The highest level, the more expensive ones, because the business community is still steaming along, those remain high. In fact, you have to squeeze a little more to get exactly what you want now. However, there's still some very good deals there, and Maurice is good at tracking those down. So, what to say? I will say that to the mid-level people, and mid-level these days, anywhere from 150 to 300,000, anyway, that range, if you're buying. And if you're renting, anything up to 1,500, 2,000 at the most. I mean, it could be 1,000. It depends whether it's furnished, unfurnished, and so forth. It could be 600, 700 if it's unfurnished, but you pay a fortune for furnishings, and so on, and so on, and so on. I go furnished when I rent, and I've always rented. Right? Those, I think you still do pretty well for in the $1,200 to $1,500 range, and you might do a little better than that in some areas. There's all sorts of deals that can be made out there. You do want to get a good one. You do want your lawyer, and you got to have somebody here as a lawyer, look over your lease if you're renting, or certainly the sales contract if you're buying, very carefully, and expect them to let you know everything that's in there and what you might be responsible for in the future. And some things are normal and other things aren't, and so on. So you just have to ask. And among other things, there's of course, and if it's a condo you're renting, then there's a condo fee on a monthly basis. That typically is part of the rent. You don't pay that. I imagine somewhere someone might ask you to do that. I wouldn't. I want it to be part of the rent. I don't want to have to worry about that, okay? And then water is usually covered by the group as a whole. Gas, which is our primary means for cooking and so forth. Here, it's less expensive than electricity. You can have an electric stove if you want one. It's just more expensive to operate. But anyway, the gasoline here is typically the building's responsibility. That is, that the owners are all chipping in for it. However, not always the case, and sometimes there are some condos have it up separately, so each apartment has to pay its share. You have to ask. And but water, no, that's not a problem. Electricity is something that you're responsible for your own, and that's separately metered. So, I know all this stuff, and then also if there's damage or there's one thing or another, the common stuff. But if you don't speak Spanish, and especially if you don't know legal Spanish, you really should have it translated. If you don't have it translated on the paper, which can cost money, warning, the least a lawyer can do is go through it, and you just ask them, I want to hear about what each clause means. Just, you don't need it in writing, but you need it there. And you listen and you take notes, you hear me, on things that are particularly of interest to you. And then you write your lawyer afterwards and say, thank you very much for meeting with us. We just wanted to confirm the following facts that you shared with us today so generously. A, B, C, D, E. So you repeat to him or her those important points that you don't want to be surprised about later on. And they will respond, and they have to respond. Because if you ask them to translate it and give you a translation and then an interpretation, you're going to be paying for the translation, which will probably pay you 4 times more than it should be because they'll probably do it themselves. But anyhow, they'll have somebody do it much more cheaply. AI is here for a reason, and beyond that. So, I mean, you just use common sense, and I say I cover it verbally, but then take notes. Just be sure you both understand what it is was said to you. And then sit down, write it up, hand it over, and expect something in writing as a response. Okay. So that's one thing to mention. But in any event, we do have a lot of really good deals, basically aided and abetted by all this confusion up north and everything else that's going on. Other areas are taking a different approach to advertising their countries and so forth. And I mean, it's just very mixed. But there's a terrific movement of people in the U.S. and Canada and Europe, moving away. I mean, Europeans are really caught in the middle. So, and they have a lot of internal politics and problems there that they have to deal with, at least in their home nation and so on. Not an easy life. So, everybody's in the same ballpark here in that sense. Most everyone, I shouldn't say everyone. Even Asians, though, have that problem because other Latin American nations are always in some sort of disarray, most of them. I don't mean that evilly. They're fine people, but their governments can be something else. That's about it. So I wanted to mention these things. Oh, there is something I'm just going to mention in passing, there's stuff going on around. I'm talking about, this is for Americans, and for all of you who are not Americans, I am sorry, but we have to do this, and I will do it for years if I ever get the information. Okay, but the point is this: Medicare, now you will hear, will directly bill or be paid directly by the hospital here. Certain specific hospitals have agreed to do this, and they can bill directly to Medicare. But after a lot of stuff, let's put it this way: it has to be an emergency. It's not for any illness you have. Don't ever get that thought in your mind. It's what's called Medicare Advantage, and you can see some of that up on the web. Well, you can see it all at the Medicare site. I'm not going to try to interpret all that, but I'll say that it isn't everything that Medicare covers. So you need to be sure that you've got an emergency on your hands. You follow that, you can answer the questions as they need. Now, one thing to keep in mind is not to depend on it anywhere you go, because it's called Medicare portability. And the idea was, this has been pushed by people overseas for 2, 3, 4, 5 decades, I don't know. And their whole thrust has been, it's going to be cheaper for the U.S. to pay overseas in a place like Panama than it would be at home, and so forth. We save money and all that for the country. And the response of Medicare is it's political. It's very political. It's very true. And I agree with them. I would never have agreed to Medicare portability, because if you do have unfortunately, a fairly substantial amount of charges made to Medicare in the United States are illicit. They're just wrong, and they're occasionally really bad actors, and they catch some that have filed 1,000 claims that are wrong. But there's plenty of it going on, and it amounts to quite a lot of money. But as the government tries to track down what it can. Now, they've always disagreed at doing this outside the nation because they don't want to have to come down here and argue court cases in a foreign court and try to collect that way. I'm surprised they even do the direct billing, but nonetheless, their general tendency has been, we don't want to get trapped in somebody else's laws. This is meant for people who are citizens but who are present in the United States. If you're living somewhere else, you have to come back to take advantage of it, but in an emergency, okay. But you've really got to prove that. And this is tricky. And if it allows the people in some hospitals to create emergencies, I don't want to go into it. This has been done in the U.S. It's been done everywhere. Now, if there's a way to game the system, people will. So that's why I'm always I agree with them. I say, you don't want to get tied up in knots legally. That costs a fortune. And you don't have any direct control over the people at the other end, because they're not your citizens. All right, that end is organized under somebody else's laws. So the simple thing is not to do that, except, as I say, in real serious emergencies. Now, I'm not even sure that's going to last. I'm just saying it. I just say it, and there are people out looking for everything they can cut up in the U.S. And Social Security and Medicare are included on that list. And something like this could be a target. I'm not saying it is. I know nothing. I don't have any information on this, but I'm telling you, you know what I mean if you're following the situation up north. So it's something that's interesting, and I will follow it, but I will not tell people that this can be done until I know it can be, and it's stuck. And it's there for a while, and I just am very nervous about that. I don't like advertising, so to speak. Not advertising in my case, but I mean recommending something that I personally think might just not be there in 3 months when the video is there 8 months or 10 months or 12 months or 2 years later, and someone hears me say, oh yeah, here's this program, and it doesn't exist. Okay, I just wanted to bring you up to date on that. Sorry if that was a little strongly worded. I'm looking so much forward to getting back to talking more and more about Panama, and I'm going to push for that, regardless of what goes on outside in times to come. And by the way, last but not least, I just sucking it up, and I'm going to start to prepare a report from Panama, which I would have done one already about now or a little earlier, March, March. And now I'm just going to go ahead and do it. I mean, and you also know that with me, that means it's going to be a week or two or so before it really is finished and is ready to be sent out to you. But again, I'll mention it more in upcoming time and let you know what's happening with it. But it's time to have one, and I'm not going to wait for the rest of the world to make up its mind what it wants to be when it grows up. We are down here, and we need to focus on what our lives are like here. So I look forward to that, and I look forward to talking to you again. Thanks for stopping by.